In 2020, I moved and I was shopless for about a year and a half, but in January of this year I finally moved into a shop, which is what you're seeing now. I'm sharing the shop with a friend, so some of the tools that you see are not mine. That's my Gen 2 belt grinder prototype, the one that came before the one in the video. And there's a 10-foot door. This is my new camera rig. It's just a rolling base with a pole and then just using a hitch ball for the joint that the camera extends off of. So this is what I'll be using to film this video that you're about to watch. This is my friend's Avid CNC. And this is my homemade bandsaw from Matthias Wandel's plans. This second room we're using mostly as storage for now, but it could become part of the shop in the future if needed. And yes, it's a terrible mess right now, and I will work on that in the future. And then there's a restroom and an office. Every shop office needs a beanbag chair and a stuffed squid. So clearly I have enough tools creating dust that I need good dust collection. This project will be split into a 3-part series. The first video about this cyclone, the second video about the blower, and the third video about the rest of the machine. So this cyclone is Bill Pence's design. So it's an 18-inch diameter upper cylinder. The cyclone tapers down to 6 inches at the bottom. The intake is 9 inches by 4.5 inches, and the outlet is 9-inch diameter. The only thing I've changed from Bill's design is that on his, the top of the upper cylinder is flat, and then it has this helix shape inside of the upper cylinder. But that means that the part between the flat top and the helix shape is not doing anything. It's just empty space, so I deleted it. I think the spiral looks cool, and I want it exposed. The part I'm marking out here will become the upper cylinder, and it's cut at an angle so that when I wrap it into a circle, the upper edge becomes a helix. I modeled all of these parts in SketchUp and then basically just unrolled them in CAD so that I would have flat templates that I could draw onto the metal. I haven't had the best of luck cutting metal with a jigsaw in the past, but I really wanted to give it another shot, so I bought some blades that I believe are good for this. I started out running the jigsaw fairly slow because I didn't want to burn up my blade, but that started making the motor hot because the fan is running so slow. So I ended up running quite a bit faster, and I didn't burn up any blades. Here I'm marking out and cutting 2 18-inch diameter circles out of MDF. These are going to be used as a form that I can roll this sheet around. I screwed down a random scrap piece of MDF to the belt grinder table, and now I'm using a drill bit as the pivot pin for that piece to rotate on so I can sand it to final diameter. I drilled these holes in the form that allow me to clamp the sheet on, so this will help it to go straight as I roll it around the form. And now I can start the surprisingly difficult task of using a ratchet strap to pull 16 gauge sheet around an 18-inch circle. While you watch me struggle with this, I just want to give credit where it's due, and again say that this is based on Bill Pence's design. I'm going to leave a link to his website below because I just appreciate the work he's done for the community, designing a good, efficient cyclone for woodworking dust collection. Here's where I ran into the first major challenge of the spiral housing. This spot where the intake chute splits off from the rest of it is a weak point, and so it bends extra easy there. I could have avoided this problem by making the inlet chute separate, but I didn't want there to be a seam, so this way the inlet chute is just blended perfectly into the body of the Cyclone. That small block helped, but I ended up upgrading it to a 2x4 and also upgrading to a larger strap because it takes more force than I expected to actually pull this tight around the form. So that seems to have worked. I have about a millimeter gap here, maybe a little less. I think it was a bad idea to put these two 2x4s in here. I need something that actually bridges across here to really cinch that seam tight so I can weld it totally flat. This inlet chute needs to be bent in a little bit more because it's not coming off the circle at the right angle. It should be in line with the square as shown here. I cut out a simple rectangle of 16 gauge sheet for the bottom of the inlet chute. And here you can see that the inlet chute is on the right angle. Here I'm laying out the top of the Cyclone housing, which is also the ramp that pushes the air down. This circle is a little larger than the diameter of the upper cylinder because as you bend it into the helical ramp, it sort of shrinks and becomes a smaller diameter than it was when it was flat. I clamped this little piece of plywood onto the end of the ramp to help align it to the bottom of the inlet chute. This block of wood is cut to the inside height of the chute, and then it also has a hole drilled in the top of it so that I can use this little tab attached to a clamp to help pull the top of the ramp down. It aligns fairly well all the way around, except on this end there's a little overhang, but I think I'm just going to ignore that, weld it on, and I'll grind off that overhang later. I don't want the inlet chute to be crooked, and as you can see here, the ramp has a lot of impact on that. So I had to be pretty careful clamping this on and making sure that I wasn't getting that crooked. And once I was happy with how it was positioned, I could just go around and finish welding it on. I had to kind of clamp it tight at each weld because the ramp really didn't want to sit tight against the side of the spiral housing, but it worked. To make the final side of the inlet chute, I'm using the offcut from the other sheet to make it the right angle. The top of the ramp wasn't totally flat, so I had to transfer that curve onto this piece and then grind it to fit. I was worried that after removing the MDF form, this might not stay round. So here I'm measuring and marking out a bunch of arc sections that I'll use to weld a flange around the bottom edge, to keep it round and also to attach the lower cone part of the Cyclone. The Jigsaw really does not work well on poorly supported corners like this, and the shape of these parts enables me to use the bandsaw because since they're curved, it hears the frame. I deburred the parts so that they would sit flat against each other and then clamped them all into a stack, which I could then weld together. With the stack acting as a single part, I can grind the inside radius until it matches the outside of the cylinder. I found the center point and then just used calipers to mark out the distance from that point to the locations for the holes. Once the holes were drilled, I could grind off the welds, and I was hoping that this would just separate, but I guess the welds penetrated deeper than I meant for them to, so I had to split them apart with a chisel. I overlapped all of the ring sections so that it could be bolted together and act as a single ring while I welded it on. There's a gap along the side here and here because the bottom of the Cyclone is bulging out slightly from the form. So I'm just clamping it tight against the form for while I weld this on. And then just bolting all of the little ring sections together so that they're tight against the cylinder. These tabs will keep the flange flat. Here I'm welding together the second ring, which will be part of the cone part of the Cyclone, and I had to be really careful here to create bridges that don't weld it onto the other part of the ring. Now that I was fairly confident that the cylinder would retain its shape, the form was ready to be removed. I mean, I was ready to remove the form. The form was definitely not ready to be removed. But I insisted, and out it came. I tried just pushing the other form out, but no luck. There's no way to jigsaw inside of here, so I had to use the router. First removing those spacer blocks. Two of the screws that were holding the form together were not accessible from the backside, so I had to pull them out with the drill. Once the center was removed, it was much easier to just pull with a clamp until it twisted and came out. This rectangle will become the Cyclone Outlet. I need to create another form, this time 9-inch diameter, and that happens to be just the right size that I can just reference directly off of my belt grinder table, so it didn't require any jig to make this the right shape. All of the metal that I've used up to this point is 16 gauge, but this part is 24 gauge. I would not have been able to bend 16 gauge around this tight of circle. This needs to somehow be pressed tight in the middle, and since it's well supported on the back side, I can just use a curved piece of wood to clamp into the middle of it. This didn't clamp it tight all the way along, but as long as it clamps it tight at one point at a time, that's all I need. I can just tighten one clamp and loosen the other to move the point where it's contacting. I checked that the outlet was straight just by measuring this distance and then measuring the same distance inside and doing the same thing on the top. And I had to put this clamp on it to push it over about an 1/8 inch to get it straight. But it is straight now, so without touching anything, I'm going to tack it in place. This Cyclone Outlet is basically just a 9-inch diameter pipe with no flange or anything on it. That's because I'm going to be using a piece of 9-inch flex hose to connect it to the blower. You'll see that in the final video of this series. Welding 24 gauge sucks. I was using the smallest wire possible and the lowest settings on my welder, and I still kept burning through. With the upper cylinder basically done, I'm ready to start building the cone. This is definitely not the fastest way to mark this curve, but sometimes figuring out a faster way to do something is slower than just doing it the slow way. And here once again I'm making a form to bend the metal around, reusing part of the form from the upper cylinder. This is also 24 gauge steel. Since it's 6-inch diameter at the bottom edge, it would have been very difficult to roll anything much thicker than this. I have it rolled 3/4 of the way around, but I can't roll it the rest of the way because of the clamps holding the seam down. You can see this MDF piece is still bending up in the middle and leaving quite a gap, and I can't fix this as simply as I did on the outlet chute. I can't just cut a curve into it because it's not supported well enough on the back side for that. But if I twist it like this, I can get it to close up on the ends, so I'll start by tack welding the ends. I found that squeezing this little piece of plywood between the MDF and the metal and then twisting the MDF over was enough to apply enough pressure to close the gap at one location at a time. Remember that second flange from earlier? Here I'm finishing welding that together. This flange will make sure that the cone stays the correct shape while I finish making it, and then it will be used to mount it to the upper cylinder. And this is all the footage I have because my phone ran out of storage space. So here it is all welded on. At the bottom of the Cyclone, I was planning to make a 6-inch diameter ring for a piece of 6-inch hose to fit over, so here I'm cutting out a piece to make that out of. So I've run into a problem. This ring is the correct diameter to fit a piece of 6-inch hose, but it is smaller than the bottom of this cone. So the cone is a little too big in diameter, and I don't have any easy way to reduce this. I think this is going to cause a bigger problem than it looks like it would, because the dust is going to sort of catch on the inside edge of this as it's coming down the cone, and I have a feeling this could substantially decrease the efficiency of the Cyclone. So I basically have two options. I can either try to reduce the bottom diameter of this cone somehow, or I can just not use this. And not using this sounds like the easier option. I'll keep this ring around for whenever I need to make a connection to a tool with a 6-inch hose. So basically I decided to not use a piece of hose on the bottom of the Cyclone, and instead the Cyclone is just going to be rigid mounted to the lid of the dust collection bin. So this flange will just let me mount that directly using screws and a gasket. I was planning to caulk all of the inside edges of this to kind of round them over so they don't catch dust, and of course to seal them up, but I didn't know what kind of caulk to use, and I was struggling to figure that out and just wanted to move on with the project, so I just welded everything solid and then ground it smooth. I was cleaning these up in preparation to paint them, but then I decided I really like how they look just like this. So I'm just going to clear coat them. But I will paint the inside of it gray. I want paint on the inside to prevent rust, and it's much easier to paint with an actual color and not clear because you can see where you've been. It was impossible to weld on this inside corner, so I put some clear silicone in there. I also used the silicone on the seam in the lower cone part of the Cyclone. Now both parts of the Cyclone are done and they need to be joined together, and for that I'm going to use this neoprene rubber material as a gasket. I'm not actually sure what this material is. It's somewhere between foam and rubber. Just some stuff we had in the shop. I'm gluing it down with regular CA glue just to hold it in place until I bolt it together. And once the gasket was done, I could attach the two parts of the Cyclone together. I'm using the wrong bolts here, but I'll replace them later. Earlier when I was welding these flanges together, I kept track of how they were oriented so that at this step I could put them back together in the same way so the bolt holes would line up. I cut 4 strips of plywood to create a flange that goes around this opening, and this will allow me to bolt on the adapter that goes from the ducting to this rectangle. I'm clamping these in place so that I can mark them to cut half-lap joints. I pulled the flange back off and drilled some screw holes for screwing this on, and countersunk the holes from the inside so that the screws will sit flush. That way they won't catch any strings. So I have a screw in this corner and this corner and this corner, but not one in this corner yet. And before I put the screw in this corner, I want to check that this is flat, because if it's twisted, then it's going to be hard to get a seal with the piece that I put against this later. So I know this is flat, so I can just put it on there, and I can see that it rocks, so I'll just grip those corners together, and now it doesn't rock. So I can screw this tight. Yep, still flat. I finished the wood part with some wipe-on poly, which is the same as I'll be using on the other wood parts of this build. And the correct screws finally came in. These are stainless steel button head screws, and I'm using lock nuts, since the flange isn't really strong enough to fully tighten these bolts on it. And that's it. The Cyclone is done. Be sure to come back for part 2, where I'll be building the blower, and part 3, where I'll be putting the rest of the dust collector together. Thanks for watching.